rules, the technical information. We welcome comments, we welcome questions. What we will be doing, first of all, I'm Joyce Jenkins, if I'm sure many of you already know me. I am one of the SIETAR Southeast Asia team here and have also been involved with SIETAR for many years in different parts of the world, in SIETAR Europa and in the UK. I will be doing the introductions. So we have a wonderful panel, three great facilitators who are going to share their extensive knowledge with us. And we will have discussions as well from all of you to be involved. We will also have a short sort of breakout room discussions as well, so get to know some of the people who are here and talk about our own situation. Then we'll have the panel, which is, as I say, focusing today on communication, particularly in the context of Asia. And today we have Srivan Naidu, who's going to talk about the non-violent communication model in the Asia context. And we'll also have Dr. Paulie Tan, who's going to introduce the intercultural development framework. And we'll have some discussion around the mindset, skills and knowledge, with closing with Professor Marie-Thérèse Glass, who's also here. So just before we get into that, let me introduce, for those of you who are not already familiar with SIETAR, SIETAR Southeast Asia is part of the global SIETAR network, which is the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research. And the lovely pictures of the team members are here. I know a number of them are present. So Marie-Thérèse is here, Judith is here, Seiji is taking part, Srivan is taking part, and Greg is also helping out as well. Our values are there on the screen. We are particularly focused on the area of Southeast Asia. We're a network. We're open to those who are either in the Southeast Asia region or who are interested and based elsewhere, who are interested in this part of the world. And we were formed because we were all involved in different intercultural activities and attending conferences in Europe and other parts, and realized that we were based in, for example, I'm in Singapore, Marie-Thérèse is often in Vietnam and Thailand, though at the moment she's in Belgium. Seiji is often in Southeast Asia as well, although at the moment he's in London. And so Judith is in Kuala Lumpur, Greg is in Kuala Lumpur as well, Srivan's here in Singapore. So we all have these interests and connections. Although now, of course, it doesn't matter where we are because it's all virtual anyway, but still we have that interest and connection with Southeast Asia. So that's just the background of SIETAR Southeast Asia. And without further ado, I'm going to move on to the next slide and hand you over to our wonderful panel. So we have Dr. Paulie Tan. And Paulie has more than 30 years experience working in adult development, training, coaching. She's taught groups from various backgrounds and cultures and in different countries, including Malaysia, Singapore, China. She's worked as an educational developer in London for King's College. And at the moment, since living in China, she's focusing on developing mindsets, talents, and leaders for multinational organizations. And she mentions that her facilitation and coaching philosophy is shaped by the Chinese middle way philosophy, as well as her own diverse experiences. So she's going to be kicking off the panel with an introduction. I'll, at the moment, introduce Srivan as well, so that you can just carry on without interruption from me. So Srivan, who is a consultant and executive in residence at IMD in Southeast Asia. He teaches mindfulness, leadership, corporate and commercial law, and education management. And he's delivered executive programs across Europe, Southeast Asia, and across ASEAN. He's also lived in Canada and France, and has previously advised companies. He's also led strategy for a university, advised companies as a corporate and commercial lawyer, and all these multi-talented people. And he's grown a startup in creative industries, as well as serving as Singapore's Deputy Director of Higher Education Policy. So another multi-talented person. And then we have Seiji, who's also going to take part in this panel. and he's an instructional designer and learning technologist. And his particular aim is bridging people, culture, and technologies. He left his home country of Japan when he was just 16 and lived in New Zealand, UK, where he's currently based, also New York and Cyprus. He's got a master's in intercultural communication, and his research on personality shift when switching languages. After that, he went back to Japan and worked briefly as a salaryman in Japan. He also worked as development manager and an IT manager. So he has, again, a multitude of talents, and I'm very happy to hand over to this panel to take forward the session.
Okay, I guess, hi everybody. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity given to me to speak about a topic that is very, very close to my heart since many, many years ago. Really grateful to everybody. This is a topic, and I'm going to talk about a framework which is again very passionate to me. And if we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. This is something I truly believe in, and I'm sure everybody will agree with me. Leadership development or any human development in this 21st century, I think we need to focus on both the vertical mindset growing transformation and the horizontal competence development. So this is the two perspectives that we are going to target on today. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on the mindset transformation in terms of intercultural development, and Srivan will talk about on the very important competence development as well. So this is what we are going to focus on. Yes, if we can again move to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a framework that I have used since 2002 and until today. I'm still very passionate about it. And it's a framework that is developed by Milton Bennett. And I'm not going to talk about the technicality of it, but I'm going to just share with you what I understand and how I have used this. Okay. Intercultural development continuum is a framework that describes certain orientation, cultural orientation, how people perceived similarity and differences when they are challenged in another culture, right? And to a certain extent, it kind of describes the mindset, emotions, mindset or belief system of a person or a group of people when they are at different stages of cultural orientation or development. And there are two extreme ends, as you can see from the slide. One is monocultural mindset, and the other extreme is intercultural mindset. And somewhere in the middle is called minimization. This is the tipping point, or what we call the breaking point. Under monocultural mindset, there are two orientations, what we call denial and polarization. Okay, monocultural mindset. And multicultural mindset is more towards like acceptance. There are again two orientations, acceptance and adaptations. I'm going to walk you through one by one and also to give you some example, right? So people at the denial orientation tend to be people who have very limited exposure to people from different culture, or maybe they have never like traveled abroad even, or they don't have any friends from different cultures. And because of that, when they see people from other culture, they tend not to feel that comfortable. And even when they travel abroad or they work abroad, they tend to want to mix with people from the same culture. For instance, if I'm a Malaysian Chinese, if I travel to London, I'm going to look for Malaysian friends or Malaysian colleagues to hang out with, because I may not feel very comfortable having a conversation with my London colleagues or British colleagues. So people at denial is at this stage. For instance, I remember when I debriefed a lady from Hong Kong. She mentioned that her profile was in denial, and she mentioned that every time she goes into a bus in Hong Kong, She tends not to sit with people from like Pakistan or Bangladesh because she feels really uncomfortable. She would rather sit with someone from her own background, like, you know, more Chinese looking people. So this is the group of people that tend to be very uncomfortable mixing with people from other culture. And there are not many of them. It's, according to the data, is about only 3%, but there are people still at this stage of development. Okay, let's move on to polarization. This orientation tends to judge difference. Okay, and under polarization, there are sub orientation. Yeah, two minor or sub orientations. That's where we call it. One is defense, the other one is reversal. So defense and reversal. Let me describe defense first. People under or people at this defense orientation tend to have a lot of negative stereotypes, okay? And they tend to say that my culture is better than yours, and my way of solving problem is better than your way of solving problem, okay? Let me give you an example. It's easier to talk about where I come from, like Malaysia, right? In Malaysia, as we all know, there are Malay and Chinese, right, as the major cultural groups. And in the business environment, for instance, the Malay will tend to stereotype the Chinese businessmen as like, you know, very materialistic, money crazy, unscrupulous, right? So it's negative, they judge the culture, is negative stereotyping. Likewise, the Chinese will have negative stereotype for the Malay businessmen. For instance, they may say that the Malay businessmen are not driven, they are lazy, blah, 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 and all. So it tends to be very, my culture is better than yours. Okay? Now, in the reversal, is the reverse. The reversal group of people tend to say that your culture is better than mine. I like to learn more. I respect your culture more than I respect my own culture. So again, in the Malaysian context, for instance, a lot of Malay businessmen, for instance, they want to work with the Chinese businessmen because they say that the Chinese businessman culture is more advanced or more developed or better than the Malay businessman culture. Therefore, they tend to say that your culture is better than mine. Okay, right, and they are like about kind of 15% of people tend to stay in this stage of development. Okay, moving on is minimization. Like I mentioned, it is the tipping point, is where in the middle. Interestingly, this is majority of people are at this stage of orientation, and normally people here tend to have a lot of knowledge already on culture. They understand the difference in educational policy, business etiquette, the do's and don'ts, and a lot of these people tend to have worked with people from different cultures, and they have lived abroad, or they have lived abroad in different countries. Okay, but the mindset or the strategies they use is like they tend to focus on cultural similarities or universal values. The belief system tend to be like everyone is the same. We should treat everybody equally and fairly. And people at minimization also tend to be very tolerant, and they do not like negative stereotype. Okay, they are totally against that. Let me give you an example. While I was working in Beijing, I worked for BMW in the workshop, and a lot of time these German leaders will come to me, Polly, you know, sharing with me, Polly, you know, my Chinese colleagues or my Chinese team, they never want to speak up in the meeting. I'm frustrated, right? You know, I don't understand why they don't speak up, because I give everybody the same opportunity because I want to be fair to everybody. So they get frustrated because they don't speak up, because, you know, this leader want to give everybody similar opportunity to speak up. So they treat everybody the same. So fairness is very important. So they kind of minimize or de-emphasize the cultural differences because of that kind of belief system. Okay. Right, let's move on to acceptance. People in this group tend to be very curious now. They are very curious about cultural differences, and they tend to be able to suspend judgment in that sense. Okay, let's again look at again BMW leaders. If they have advanced to acceptance orientation, this is when they understand and they know the reasons why the Chinese, for instance, the Chinese counterpart or Chinese team members do not speak up in the open meeting because of the hierarchical culture, or some of them do not like to speak in front of their leaders. They do not like confrontation. Also harmony, you know, the value that they highly regarded. So people at this orientation tend to understand. So for instance, the BMW leaders, they know why the Chinese team members do not speak up. But at this stage, these leaders do not know how to solve this problem yet. They understand why, but they don't know what to do to encourage the Chinese counterparts to speak up, for instance. So they are acceptance, but they don't know how to solve the problem. Moving on to adaptation is, again, that's where people at this group tend to have multiple cultural lenses. They either have bicultural or multiple cultural lenses. They are able to bridge across differences. All right, and again, like for example, this BMW leader, if their adaptation is when they know how to solve the problem, they're able to go to the Chinese counterpart and say that, oh, for instance, give them 1 day in advance. This is what we are going to discuss in the meeting, perhaps, and I'm going to ask your opinion. Perhaps, you know, you want to prepare, or go to them one-to-one and ask for some feedback or comments. So they are able to kind of solve the problem as compared to people at acceptance. Now, again, people at adaptation, they tend to play the role of like the bridge between culture, right? For instance, when I was in Singapore, I always listen to some of my Singaporean friends or colleagues complain about Chinese from mainland China, say then that they are too loud, they don't queue. And the role of these people at adaptation is to kind of bridge the culture, to explain to them why they speak very loudly. For instance, if the Chinese speak very loudly, some of them is because they want to show that they are very passionate about the topic, or very passionate about your friends. Yeah, the friends. So, so that is the different stages of development. And if I can show you the next slide, is the report. If we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, the next one. Understanding this intercultural development report. Just would like to share with you. This is a profile of a colleague of mine who is an Australian female, Caucasian Australian female. And she has married a Chinese husband from Beijing. And she has stayed and lived and worked in China for like more than 20 years. And if you can look at her profile, if you look at the perceived orientation, this is what she perceived she is at that stage, how she perceived herself to be at acceptance, adaptation kind of stage. But her real developmental orientation is at minimization. So what I'm saying is, like, you know, a lot of us, I mean, including everybody, a lot of profiles that I see, you think that you are there, but sometimes because you do have unconscious bias, you may not be aware of that. And your developmental orientation is like, a lot of people are like even before perceived orientation. So I hope I have given you some understanding, explanation on this framework. And the next thing is to invite you to go to the breakout room. And the invitation is for you to reflect and share with your partner in the breakout room, where do you think you are at this continuum? Yeah, I mean, there's no right or wrong. It's just a friendly conversation about where you think you are. So I encourage everybody to take a screenshot of this if you can't remember the name of all the orientations before we put you into the breakout rooms. So once you're ready, sorry?
No, sorry, I thought you were sending people in breakout rooms. Yeah.
No,
Yes,
I'm not
ahead.
sending.
Okay.
I don't have the right yet. Great, you are the one, right? Yeah. So if you don't have any question, if you're clear, the invitation is just to have a friendly conversation, about 5 minutes for 2 person. Yeah. Sorry, there's a question, am I right?
Yes, there's a question about the polarization, a question from Vincent.
Yeah, polarization, defense. There are two, defense and reversal. Sorry, defense and reversal. Defense is my culture is better than yours. Reversal is your culture is better than mine. Yeah.
Fully, the question in the chat is, can the defense not necessarily be bipolar between two cultures, but can it be multipolar? Like if you have a group with multiple cultures, can defense apply even to explain in a more than two cultural context?
I don't really understand this. It's not necessarily be bipolarized, but can be multipolar.
Would you like to invite? Would you like to invite the questioner to turn on his mic?
Yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah. Vincent, if you don't mind, switch on your mic and your camera and ask only the question.
Yeah, sorry, not just to make it simple. I want because the example you mentioned, I think if I remember correctly, Poli, was bipolarized between you and the other. I think. Yeah. Now I think I know the answer. I was just wanted to check that it can also be multipolar. Obviously, you can be in a situation of defense versus many other cultures, not only one.
Yes.
Two, but
Yes.
a lot more.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to
make
sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
correct.
that's what I thought too. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. You can be like, you can criticize many other cultures and you think that your culture is the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, clear. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, enjoy the conversation and see you soon. Okay, welcome back. So I think the next thing is to address some of your questions. If you have any questions during your sharing or during my explanation, if you have any questions, we have 5 minutes. Is that Sergi or correct? 5 minutes for quick questions. And also after the session, we will also take more questions if we don't have time now. Thank you. Raise hand. Marie. Yes, Marie. You are muted. Do you want to unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted now, I guess. Right.
Yes.
The question I had, and I also discussed it in the breakout room, is, you know, for me, the difference between denial and minimization is not very clear. Because denial doesn't mean that I don't know any other cultures and I don't know, but it means, like, for example, that people would say, oh, well, we're all business people, or we're all humans, you know? And as this is what we hear now in the United States when we talk about racism, we're all human beings, and that's not wanting to see that there is a difference, right? Not wanting to acknowledge that there is a difference. And that for me is denial. I was wondering, what is then the difference with minimization?
Okay.
Where you said you don't see the difference.
Okay, good question, Marie. Thank you for that. And what you mentioned just now, we are all business people. We are all the same. Tends to be minimization. Okay. Yeah. And majority of people, especially the dominant group, tend to linger longer at minimization. Denial. So minimization, people tend to have a lot of exposure to cultural differences and similarities. Like I mentioned in the profile, this friend of mine, she has a Chinese husband. She's an Australian female, Chinese husband, and she has lived and worked in China for like 20 years. And she is using that strategy that everybody like go along to get along, or everybody is the same. We just be tolerant and then respect each other and kind of mask the cultural differences, especially the deep cultural differences. So minimization tend to be there. Denial is like, that is kind of like, there is no sense that culture is important in all. They are so afraid even to listen to language of different culture. Like, I remember there are some people, when they look at me, I look very different. And when I speak with a different accent. And some people from other culture may tend to find me very strange and dare not even come to me to approach me. You know, that kind of denial is like, that they have this kind of sense. So they tend to have very limited exposure to culture. Very limited. That's why they are not comfortable.
So it's more like avoidance?
Yeah, totally avoidance. They don't feel comfortable at all. And yeah, and when they listen to like a non language that they are not familiar, they are like totally like, you know, stay a distance away.
Okay.
I hope I'm making it clearer. Thank you for that question. Do we need to move on already, or do we have time?
There's one more question by Maytal on the chat. She just said, "I have a question, please." If you would like to unmute your microphone and ask the question, or would you be able to do that?
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, hi. Sorry, I lost you for a moment.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Seiji, you were talking to me?
Yes. If you said that you have a question, so
yes, right.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, Polly, for this beautiful presentation. I really enjoy, and I find this model very useful, although I haven't used the assessment yet. And I have two quick questions. The first one, if I remember right, there was a 6 case for this model, which is about integration. After the adaptation, the last one about integration. So I wanted to ask about why it's not in the assessment. And the second question I want to ask, I don't know if you can give me the answer, but is it possible to do an online certification to be able to use this tool with clients?
Okay, thank you. Good question. When you talk about integration, it's something I have not seen in this framework, but they used to have another assessment, but it's not part of the continuum, but it's assessed when you pay for the assessment. It's called cultural disengagement. Cultural disengagement, meaning people who, when you're disengaged with your culture, that means people who do not feel connected with their own cultural roots. Like, for instance, like I have lived in so many countries. When I come back to Malaysia, I don't feel like a Malaysian at all. So that is called cultural disengagement. So that is one section of it that measure that. Used to measure that. Now they have changed it. They took it away in this assessment. I have asked for it, a reason. They never told me a reason, so I don't know. Secondly is, yes, you can, I think you can do it online now. They have offered recently an online certification. You check the website, IDI website, and I'm sure it's announced there. Yeah, thank you. Have I answered your question? I hope I have answered your question. Okay, she's frozen, so. Oh, thank you. Cool. Right. Do we need to move on, Srivan? We can't hear you, you're muted. Is there another question?
Sorry, let me just see if there's anything more on the chat. Does denial mean avoiding confrontation? I think you explained that it's more like a bit like xenophobia.
Yeah, a little bit more on that. Yeah.
Okay. Can I suggest that because actually the two sessions are quite complementary. If there are any questions, we can take them again later. at the end, because we have lots of time at the end. And Polly, if you don't mind, I will proceed to the next stage.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Polly. So we proceed now to the next portion of the presentation. And while Polly described her session as focusing more on the mindsets, correctly, this one focuses ostensibly at first glance more on the skills and the competence. But there is also mindset embedded in this, and this will lead us nicely to a discussion of can you do one without the other at the end, right? So let me just begin. I'm talking about primarily something called non-violent communication, which was developed in the late 60s, 1970s by somebody called Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. It was used to help in the desegregation movement, to have black and white kids attend schools together, and also for gender equality and feminist activists. So it's a well-proven framework. Let me just take you through it, and we can ask questions along the way. And we'll have lots of activities to try it out, right? So welcome to nonviolent communication, right? And I really love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. The biggest problem in communication is our illusion that it has taken place, right? We think we have been clear. We think the other person understands us because we've been so clear, but most often they don't understand us completely because we have biases, we have assumptions. So although we all intend to communicate clearly, it's not enough just to have good intentions. We need to be skilled, right? And the thing I want to talk about is that the skills required are not very difficult, but they're not very obvious. When it's pointed out to us, we realize that we could be so much better. But then the next day we go back to our old habits, right? Because we're not actually wired for the complex communications that we have in today's society, right? We were made for much simpler communication in small tribal communities, right? So, sorry, just like police developmental orientation versus what we think about ourselves, we think we are much better at communication than we are, but also we underestimate that we could be much better. Right now, I want you to take a moment and think of the best communicators that you know of. If you think, who is the best communicator you know of? Think about the first two names that come to mind. Usually my participants will say somebody like President Obama or Bill Clinton, or in the East, they will talk about Dalai Lama, right? Who's known to be very quiet for a long while and then say, I don't know, for example, right? So there are people who are very good at communication, and we can all get much closer to that with just a few simple steps, right? I'm not saying we're going to be there overnight, but it's not that difficult to get significantly better than you are. Let's see how I mean this, right? So this is a typical situation during COVID pandemic, and they're staying at home. We're trying to be on a Zoom meeting and somebody in our family closes their bedroom door. It's a bit too loud. The person we're talking to can't hear it. It's a bit disruptive, right? And the typical reaction is you say something like, must you slam your bedroom door every time? You say this to your family member. Now, good communication is about effectively changing the behavior of others, right? That must be one of the intentions for good communication. So I'm going to ask you now, take a moment, look at this statement, must you slam your bedroom door every time? And put on a scale of 1 to 5, is it likely to change the other person's behavior, right? And we won't go into a poll, but just type into the chat box any number 1 to 5 that you think evaluates the likelihood that this comment is going to be successful, right? So Diane says 1. Thank you, Diane. Klaus says 1. Some say 2, yes. So far, 1s and 2s. Just take another 10 seconds for everybody to type in. Right. So this group is quite in consensus with 1s and 2s. There are some groups where some people actually put in a 3, right? And let's go through this exercise and reflect again whether anything other than a 1 or 2 is justified, right? So I give you the original comment on the left, and I give you 3 options of how you might make it better, right? And think about these. The parts in red are the important differences. And ask yourself, what is better about each of these options, right? And maybe you can type into the chat box what you think is good about A, B, or C. Just say A is good because, or B is good because. I mean, if you think A, B, or C is worse than the original, please let me know as well. For some reason, I'm not seeing that. Okay, chats are coming in. Lots of C's and B's. All right, so, but A, okay, so all of them have their merits, right? And let's look at, according to the non-violent communication framework, what is good about each of them. Even A, which none of you sort of highlighted, is better in one way. When you say, must you slam your bedroom door every time, I might react by focusing on, you said every time, it's not every time. What do you mean by every time? And that's missing the point. We're arguing about some subjective evaluation when the whole issue is about the noise and the door, right? So 3 basics of non-violent communication are replace subjective judgments and evaluations with facts that you have observed, right? So the first one, going from every time to 9 times this week. And you probably should be sure that it is 9 times this week before you say it. Right? And then so the issue is not about whether it happened or not. The issue is about what happens. The second thing in blue is express your needs clearly and honestly. This helps the other person empathize with you. And if they care about you, it makes it easier for them to understand why they should listen to you, right? So you'd say my need is to have some quiet work ethic. It's a rare person who will not understand or agree with that as a legitimate need. Then you should make a clear request. Rather than sounding like a criticism, you should say what you need from the other person, right? Because if you don't say what you need to do, how do I know what to change, right? So in orange is, could you be extra careful to close your door quiet, right? So each of these has an element that improves the communication from the original. One is to be more factual. Another is to state your needs. And the third is to make your request great. So this is a basic. And if we did this more often, we would have a lot more productive conversations most of the time, right? But this is very basic. This is very, very basic. Let's take it to another level now with a more complex situation. Let's imagine we're in Kuala Lumpur or Tokyo, not in America where this framework was developed, right? Read the scenario, your boss is senior, they ask you to work over the weekend, and it is for an important reason, but you have to improve a new colleague's proposal, and you've been spending time at work, you plan to spend time with your kids, and you have already told your boss, and your boss already knew you were planning to spend time with your kids the weekend, right? So are you going to speak to him directly and remind him? No. Are you going to challenge because there's some power difference in Asian cultures? So look at the headline of this slide. How well would it work to approach this situation using the 3 basics that we just talked about? Do you think it will work in Asia as smoothly as it would in, say, America? If you have some concerns, let me know what the concerns will be. So for example, could you say, boss, I had told you earlier this week that I intended to spend time with my kids. My need is to spend time with my kids, to have some work-life balance. Would it be okay if I didn't work on this weekend? That sounds likely, yeah? So Joyce was saying it's difficult in Asia to challenge the boss. Any other comments? So let's talk about what it takes to adapt nonviolent communication for Asia, right? So in Asia, we have these following characteristics. Generally, some Asian cultures more than others, but generally these 3 things are more Asian than West, right? We value harmony over confrontation, like Polly was saying. If we have an objection, we rather say it quietly before the meeting, rather than at the meeting in front of our colleagues. There's a higher power distance. So some things you could say in a more equal culture like the West, you can't say as a junior person to a senior. And we're more collectivistic. We care about the group more than your individual needs, right? So to say my need is this sounds a little self-centered in Asia, right? So these are some comparisons from Hofstede and Hans Trompenas, well-known cultural experts. The difference between individualism on the left and collectivism or communitarianism. We try to use we, the relationship matters. We try not to use the word I and harmonies. So, and here's a scoring done by Hofstede about on a continuum of very individualistic to very collectivistic. What are our cultures? And you see Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines in Southeast Asia are among the lowest, right, in terms of individualism and highest in terms of collectivism. The Europeans are a bit more moderate, closer to Asia than the Anglo-Saxon, US, UK, and Australian culture, right? So here are some ways my clients and myself have found to adapt nonviolent communication for Asia, right? So you emphasize the relationship as much as what needs to be done. Then you talk about the collective interest of the group rather than just my interest and my needs, right? And you can try to find a way to merge them and make suggestions rather than requests, right? So it's easier for the person to say no, because in Asia, we don't like to say no. In the West, you make a request, it's okay if the person says no, right? And because of the power distance, you might phrase your suggestion differently if you were a subordinate than if you were a boss. For example, if you were a subordinate, you might say, what do you think about us? And not just pretending to be curious, but really being curious, because the boss may have other ideas he hasn't told. Okay? Or if you're the boss, you could say, it would be better if you did this. And note that I say it would be better, not it would be good. Because when you say it would be good, it almost implies that the original action is bad, and I'm telling you how to make it good. When you say it would be better, it sort of sounds like what you're doing is fine, but I would like you to do something, right? It's a bit more harmonious, gracious, more Asian. And I'm not saying it's better than the Western approach, I'm just saying it's different, right? And you want to adapt to which setting you're in, right? So looking at this, let's look at how you could have answered your boss who asked you to work on the weekend, right? And here are three options again. Pick which one you like best. And I would invite Poli and Seiji to start us off by saying which of these would work, say, in Malaysia, and which of these would work in Tokyo, or Osaka, where Seiji is from, and see what are the pros and cons of each of these responses to working on the weekend. And I'd like everybody to share on the chat group as well, whether they like A, B, or C, and maybe 1 or 2 reasons why. So let's take 2 minutes, no rush. Think about all 3, type in your comments, and then we'll hear from Seiji. All right? And if you'd rather turn on your mic and speak, that's fine. Thanks, Marie. Marie-Therese says she'll do her best. Marie-Therese, is that your response to your boss that you will do your best, or? Okay. So lots of B's, some C's. Thanks, Neil. Neil Gaines is a former colleague from Singapore, now operating in Bangkok. Lots of people are picking B. Okay. All right, let's take another 10 seconds. There is no sort of right or wrong. It's more like we're looking at what is good about each of these responses. Vincent says B is Asian assertive. I'd love to hear from Vincent. But let's hear from Seiji and Poli first, if you don't mind. And then Vincent, please switch on your mic right after Seiji and Poli. Seiji, would you like to start us off?
Sure. It's a tough one. I have gone through this dilemma quite a lot when I was working in Japan. I would also say B, but a little bit more complicated one. In Japan, obviously, you do have to, one of the things that I learned in the really hard way is that you always have to go to your boss with the respect of their time. So you start with, oh, excuse me, do you have any time to give me some wisdom? That would be the phrase that you would use. So can I borrow your wisdom, and do you have any small time to spare?
Sorry, could you repeat that a little louder? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, do you have enough small time to spare your wisdom with me? So
okay.
you kind of show that you're respecting their time and their limited time. Then you present that the situation, that by the way, this situation, clear observation of the situation, about the whole working on the weekend. Thank you for trusting me. So that is the part that you give the gratitude about the trusting part, so building the relationship. Then you also present what you think would be the best solution. But at the end, you need to ask, so I would like your opinion on this. So that you're not just presenting your idea, but you also ask that you are trusting this boss to give you his opinion, his or her opinion on how to deal with this, so that it keeps the relationship more better. And by doing that, you also build a trust between each other as well.
Okay, so Seiji, would you say that combining A and B would be good? Sort of thank you, but then what do you think?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So, Polly, is it any different in Malaysia?
I think it's the same. The relationship is very important. You do not want to ruin the relationship. So you do everything to keep the relationship, depending on your boss's needs, what they like to hear, right? You say that, yeah, thank you for your trust, or I'm very honored, you know, or even before speaking to him, you kind of respect. Do you have time?
Yeah.
I need a moment with you privately, you know. Normally it's in private because you're going to say no to him. You don't say no to him in a whole meeting in front of everybody. So normally in a private conversation. Yeah. Okay. So that's what I would do. Yeah. And do whatever Seiji has said. Yeah. Even like say something like, you know, yeah, my mother needs me, you know, because family is very important as well. So sometimes the boss may understand if you have like family, like urgency, you know, things like that. You may even say something very indirect, you know, to help you. Right. Thank you.
So what's different from other discussions I've had? In other discussions, the group has been divided as to whether you can ever say no to your boss. But you make it sound, Polly, that it's possible to say no. It's just how you say it. Right? Okay.
You don't say no directly. You don't say no directly.
Right. You make it say it's more like it will be very hard for me because of this reason, etc. And let them excuse you and give you a way out, right? Vincent, please turn on your mic and ask. Are you there, Vincent? Sorry, not so much ask, but explain what you mean by Asian assertive. I can hear you. You're on mute, Vincent. Vincent, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I was just trying to be a bit funny with Asian, just generalizing Asia. Of course, as you said, harmony, very important, respect for the authority, indirect communication, all that, which of course is Asian general. So to me, it looks indeed very, very Asian, the way you just say to try to get away, but at least involving the boss as well, or the other person. I think is very wise. I like also Seiji's phrase of, you know, can I borrow your wisdom? I like this one too. And you know, for the Dutch would just say, no, I have private planned the weekend, that's it. Yeah, and I think the boss would not even dare to ask anything if the person had said before that they had private planned the weekend, so the boss would not ask at all. So, you know, it's an enormous gap here, obviously, and that's why I call that Asian, you know, the values you mentioned, which are clear to us, I think.
So in Holland, if a Dutch boss had forgotten that you already told him you had family plans, your assumption would be he must have forgotten. It can't be that he's being a bad guy. He must have forgotten. I just have to remind him and everything will be set.
I don't want to generalize too much, but if you had said before in the conversation that you have those plans, private plans the weekend, the boss would also respect that. And because the Dutch very clearly separates business from private, it would hardly dare to ask you to do something on the weekend. provided you had said before, okay, this is a hypothetical, of course, but unless there's a big urgency, but usually you separate business from private, and then you don't ask anything for the weekend anyway. So that's completely different here, of course. That's why I call it Asian, but still assertive. I like this. I think it's assertive to be. I think it's a way to still say, you know, assertively, I'm not so happy about it, so maybe I should do that with the other person.
Thank you so much. Polly, we didn't talk about this before, but I'm wondering whether we can use this as a way to reflect on your intercultural development by saying, while you are listening to this discussion, if somebody felt this is unnecessary, this is so roundabout, why can't we be more direct? What does it tell you about which stage you're at? Versus somebody who says, now I see, now I know how to operate in Asia, which stage are you at, right? Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, if you say that my direct way of communication is better than your indirect way of communication, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you say my way is better than yours, where do you think that stage is? Defensive, right? Defense, right? Yeah. Polarization, right? Yeah. So very often that is the conflicts, right? Direct and indirect communication. We often see that's where the conflict of the intercultural teams or global teams, they have this issue all the time. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about two further stages of nonviolent communication, right? So we were talking about the basics and then how to adapt it for Asia, right? But it's also one pitfall with nonviolent communication. It's not meant to be how nonviolent communication works, but many times people get into this problem where they say, I am committed to empathetic or nonviolent communication, but the other person is difficult, right? And sometimes in the room, somebody will say, hey, you know, there's this guy back in the office who I try to be nice to, but he's always violent. At which point my question is, actually, if he were in the room and I asked him, what would he say about you, right? And then the guy goes, oh yeah, maybe he would say the same thing about you, right? And so the thing about nonviolent communication is you should look beyond what they say. They may sound violent or they may sound defensive, but hear the underlying need, right? The underlying human need may be they are being defensive because they don't feel safe. They feel you are imposing on their turf, etc. And so don't listen to their no, listen to what is their unstated need, and maybe you can progress, right? Because if you say, I will only be as non-violent as him, then we go downward and downward. But if you say, I will lead the way, and even if he's not as non-violent as I hope he would be, I will listen closer, I will hold myself up to a higher standard, and then maybe we can progress, right? And this is called the robustness principle. And basically it says, be careful with what you say, but be very generous with what you receive, right? So hold yourself up to the highest standard, and maybe over time, your communication gets to a higher and higher, right? We can't be judgmental about the other guy and say the other person is not communicating non-violently, so I'm not good. So that's one level further on nonviolent communication. Seiji, Polly, if we have time, I'd like to take maybe another 3 minutes to talk about how to react when you get a really badly phrased request, right? So if somebody says to you, why must you slam the door every time? And then you immediately like, your reaction is, who says every time, and why are you talking to me like that? Why are you being critical? What the heck do you want? How do you respond, right? And so basically, the thing is, I teach my clients to take 3 steps: pause, empathize, and discover. Right? And so let me go through this in just another 2 minutes, and we can have a discussion. Right? So the pausing is about taking a deep breath, because the breath calms us down. Just breathe a bit slower. Don't have to breathe very deep or very slow. Just a bit slower than you're breathing now, right? And pay attention to the sensations, whether it's the temperature, the pressure, the sound of your breath, the smell of the air, and that takes us away from our thoughts, right? Our sensations takes us away from our thoughts. So it's what you call coming to your senses, as opposed to being led by your thoughts, right? And when you pause, you can separate from your emotions. Instead of saying, I am angry, you just notice that this is anger. because the anger may come and go. When you say, I am angry, then you start to identify with the anger, which is not very helpful. Instead of thinking they hate me, and you start to believe this is truth, you say, I have the thought that they hate me, or like people with Indian accents tend to say, I am thinking they hate me, right? So when you say, I am thinking, you can next minute think something else. So your thought doesn't become a permanent thing. It doesn't become the truth. It's just your temporary thought or your temporary assessment of the situation. And then you distance and you become more flexible, right? So that's the first part about pausing. The second part is about empathize, and that is taking an other-centric view. Don't be so selfish. It's like the camera, you're in selfie mode, switch the camera to face the other person, right? So you switch your perspective from about you to about the other person, right? Now, there's some debate now about the word empathy and compassion. Empathy may lead to burnout, but compassion is a bit more detached. You don't get burnt out from compassion, but you may get burnt out from empathy. I think it's semantics. Basically, you don't want to feel too much the other person that you start losing touch with your own need to be compassionate, right? And my good friend who is a psychologist at the Institute of Mental Health will tell a patient, if somebody imposes on you, you need to draw boundaries, but it doesn't have to be electric fence. It can be a soft padded board you use to push them away and say, I wish I could do what you ask, but I can't. Let's see if I can do what you need in another way. But you don't have to sort of get defensive and aggressive, push them, right? That's about drawing boundaries, taking care of yourself. And the last stage is to discover. And this Polly also mentioned earlier. One of the later stages in the development framework is to really be curious, right? And curiosity is one of those very valuable traits to cultivate. And I would suggest a good question to say to the other person when they make a request or they communicate a little violently is to say, what makes you say that? And what is a better question than why? Because people can get defensive about why, but what they could reply with what is their assumption or what is your action that made them say that, what is broader, and it allows them more room to explain themselves where they're coming. Right? So I find that what makes you say that is a great question to display your curiosity. So pause, empathize, switch your perspective, and then discover by asking a curious question. Right? So this is a good way to improve your nonviolent communication. So I'm done. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions about nonviolent communication. And or even we can go into questions about the overall session. I think what I'm saying is besides the skills that we covered earlier, there's also this mindset that I really am curious. When I'm communicating, I'm not preparing my next sentence. I'm really listening to find out something about you that I may not know about you yet. I'm really curious. I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm trying to learn. And that's the mindset. Polly, maybe you can start us off by reflecting about what mindsets are covered in my presentation. And we can start taking questions on the chat box or turning on your. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Striven. Yeah, that was very, very helpful. Yeah, I mean, we talk about both horizontal and vertical, right? If you are at denial or defensive, it's very difficult to empathize, right? So yeah, so your request or invitation to pause, right, and to empathize, I think that is the most important request. If one can do that, I think that's when you can move on. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck at denial, polarization, or even minimization, because a lot of people at minimization, they think they are doing well already because they do have some kind of certain success, managing across culture to a certain success. And that kind of give them the kind of ego, perhaps to a certain extent. I'm already done. I don't need to know anymore. I just use my strategy. Everybody is the same. I treat everybody fairly. What's your problem? You know? Yeah. So totally agree with you in that. Yeah, the curiosity and the open, mindset, empathy, and compassion. Yeah.
Thank you, Polly. Seiji, you've read the book Nonviolent Communication, and you were telling me it doesn't really apply in Japan so straightforwardly.
It doesn't mean that it doesn't apply fully in Japan. Probably, may I share my personal experience being back in Japan, trying to use nonviolent communication. So I had already read the nonviolent communication book before I went back to Japan after spending 10 years being overseas. And I was already on the stage of acceptance about Japanese culture. And basically, I went back to Japan as Joyce when Joyce introduced me. I went back to Japan to experience the Japanese salaryman life, where people, have a specific understanding of how weird that is, or how specific that is, unique that is. So when I started working in Japan at the non-English speaking, non-international manufacturing company, I put a lot of emphasis on using nonviolent communication in order for me to communicate a better way. So I spent quite a lot of time just observing and also trying to make sure that I go through those 4 stages, that I tell the observation, my feeling, and I talk about the needs and request. One thing that I struggled a lot is that in Japan, a lot of things are implied. So, for example, very simple example would be someone might come into your room and say, "Oh, it's quite hot here." That would also mean so that, can you open the door? But if I say that explicitly, I come in and say, "Oh, it's hot here, and I want the room to be colder because I don't want to get too hot and my temperature goes up. So can you open the window?" That kind of makes you, in a way, that makes you as a person who is extremely bothersome, because it takes so much time to deliver your message.
Sorry, Seiji, this is very interesting because, sorry to interrupt, but in nonviolent communication, one of the main things is when you make your request, you also state your need, because then the other person can say, maybe I can't say yes to your request, but I can meet your need another way. So if you said it's hot in here, the other person need not open the door. They may actually switch on the aircon. They may give you a glass of ice water, and maybe it does the trick, right?
But the thing is, in Japan, you have to, quite a lot of certain levels, you do need to trust on those relationships, and also you need to rely on the assumption that you guys, or we, understand each other without so much words. So therefore, that's the importance about the couples, or how husband and wife, that they just, like my father, he just comes home and he just says, and then that means, can you give me a beer? And that kind of relationship becomes the sign of the trust. So when I actually went back to Japan to use this a lot at work, people started, because I was really trying to be more, put more emphasis on exposing my positive intention, exposing my, clarity of communication, to make sure that everyone understood what I meant. But I approached it from Western point of view too much. So everyone started seeing me as a guy who doesn't understand Japanese culture, because I was so explicit, and so I was still being very polite, but I'm not using any aggressive words, but I was being very clear on what I say, rather than trusting people to understand what I meant. So everyone felt, some of the people later on, when I go out with them and have a drink and have a casual chat, they tell them that at that time when I was doing it, everyone felt quite uneasy that must you explain everything was the word that they also felt, because in Japan you just say it, you just state something, and you need to learn something. So there's a word in Japan that they hear 1 and learn 10, or hear 1 and learn 100. And I was doing completely opposite thing. I was saying 100, and I wanted 1 thing.
Yes. Okay. Is part of it, I'm curious, is part of it that you give the other person a chance to show that they care about you, they care to guess the meaning of what you want, and over time, as they're getting better at guessing what you mean and what you need, it's a sign that you're getting closer.
Yeah.
As opposed to, if you always spell it out, then we are the same as strangers after X months.
Yeah.
Okay.
But very difficult part is that obviously even, you know, I look Japanese, but everyone's expectation was that I know that codes, that I can use the codes and, you know, the nonverbal behaviors. But
yes,
obviously how this is the part that I think that also relates to the police mindset and knowledge, that the more knowledge I had, I just didn't know how to navigate that knowledge. And I had the mindset to do that. I tried to I tried to use the empathy, and I tried to understand and put myself into others' shoes, but I just didn't know how to navigate that knowledge, because sometimes I can act on it, I know it, but I just don't know how to use it. And that was a really big dilemma that I had to suffer when I went back to Japan to work. Even I was trying to use the nonviolent communication.
So yeah, we need both mindset as well as skills, right? And the skills could be nonviolent communication skills or any number of skills, like cultural sensitivity skills, knowledge about each culture. Thank you. I'm happy to have more comments. So I'm just reading at the chat box now. Joyce says, great example, Seiji. Same is true the other way around when you go back to Europe or US from Japan and try Japanese implicit communication, but no one understands what you're trying to. And Cecilia says, high context style is a landmine for misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Even with people you know. That's something I still struggle with. Metal asked a very good question. Why did they name it non-violent communication? I actually believe, let me just answer this, and then maybe Polly can talk about Cecilia's question about struggling with misunderstanding in high context. But I think if they didn't call it non-violent communication, it'd be more popular and more widespread. The name may put some people off, but it comes from, if I'm not wrong, it comes from Gandhi's non-violent resistance, which then Martin Luther King used as non-violent resistance or civil disobedience. So it's in that from that background or history of making your case and making your arguments without a violent way, right? But I think, which is why I call this presentation positive communication or empathetic communication, because if I title it non-violent communication, half the people who would actually benefit from it might be turned off. So Polly, maybe explain to us your example of how to avoid misunderstanding with high context style.
That's a tricky one as well, even though like I can share with you, adaptation, there is only about 1.5% of people in the population of like this assessment who are at adaptation. Yeah, we may think that we are at adaptation, but actually it's not that easy. Yeah, despite me working in China, speaking the language, I'm Malaysian Chinese. When I work in China with a Chinese client or colleague, sometimes I know they are indirect, right? But I don't really know what they mean. So very often my strategy is like, you know, I go to a colleague or somebody I can trust, you know, and who will tell me the truth because of the trusting relationship that we have built. And I will ask them, what does this mean? Does it mean this or does it mean that? And they will tell me the truth. Once you build that very close, trusting, long-term relationship. Otherwise, nobody will tell you. It's very difficult. So what I'm saying is a struggle, but this is the strategy I use when I can't read, when I can't read as an outsider. Yeah. When I can read, it's easy, but when you can't read, sometimes they can be so indirect. You're just like, okay, I know that. Okay, I need to find out. Okay, thank you very much for the answer, yeah. And then I'll go and find out. Yeah, that's how I would do it. Yeah, so it's struggle.
I'm going to invite people to raise their hands and actually turn on their mics, because it's nicer to see you ask the question than to read off the chat box. But before that, Greg, I spoke to Greg before about nonviolent communication in a different culture, say with Europeans, and he made the same suggestion. When you get stuck, bring in an insider, bring in a broker. I mean, we are conscious that there's a difference, but we don't know what the difference is, right? So it's like going from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. To get to conscious competence, we may need a help, right? We may need broker. And Greg was telling me was advising me exactly the same thing when I was discussing with him previously. Greg, could you give us some examples where bringing in a local helps? I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Yes. Sorry, I need to think of the example. What about maybe, because Marie-Therese had just raised hand.
Okay.
So what about we let Marie-Therese talk and I will come back with the example. Is that okay with you?
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, that's fine. I can also wait. I can also wait. Because
he wants time, right?
Yeah, I've been thinking
I can
about this interesting discussion here. For example, when I was working in Thailand, I had this kind of situation where my boss would ask to do something over the weekend, although I had other plans. And when your boss asks something like that in Thailand, you say, okay, right? You say, okay. And then you add something like, I will do my best, so that he gets an inkling that there might be something there. And then over lunch or over coffee, you talk to your colleagues and you ask the others, any plans for the weekend? So they will ask you as well, what are your plans? Because you assume that your boss has forgotten about your plans for the weekend.
Yes.
And so, you know, the grapevine works very well in those cultures, right? The grapevine, yeah. So he will hear indirectly from somebody that, you know, I had other plans for the weekend. And I would more or less understand that it's okay if I don't do it, and if I get my message through. If you see what I mean, right? In a very indirect way. And you trust and you hope, in a way, that it's not too ambiguous. And as somebody said, yes, it's not always clear. And you just hope that things work that way. And and I agree very much with Polly saying that you ask other people, you know, how would you do this? How would you say that? And things like that. Look,
but I took away your point that saying I will try my best is very different from yes, no problem. Right? I will try my best. Absolutely. Gives a signal that there might be a problem.
Needs something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, Gregory.
Yeah, sorry. Now I raise my hand, right? About being the broker.
Just hang in there. Okay, great.
Yeah. Just I just remember, because I've been working between France and China for quite a long time, right? And I was working with for example, the French colleagues and bidding for some projects in China. And during the meeting, there was no oppositions, etc. So the French colleagues thought that, okay, we got the deal, etc. Because there was no opposition, no confrontation, right? So I see a lot of people smiling already because you get it, right? So if nothing is said, etc., it doesn't mean that you get the project. You need to have the one-on-one conversation after the meeting to understand what is happening. So I relate to the broker, right? It's because I'm able to swim in the two environments and to translate the signals from the two environments. Then I could be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, Vincent.
No, I'd like to go back to this. It's hard here because I had exactly the same situation experience in Japan as well. I was teaching a class one in Japan. It was late in the afternoon. It was very hot in the room, and I said more or less loudly to myself, "Don't you think it's hot here?" And much to my surprise, all the students sitting next to the windows stood up to open the windows. For me, as a Western European, French, Dutch, that was really surprising. I didn't ask them to open the windows, and they did, because they eye context, Japan, they read between the lines, they understood if the authority in class says to open the window, suggest it's hot, it means open the window. So I was very surprised. And ever since, I've used this anecdote, this is some years long ago, I've used this anecdote in multicultural settings, whether it's business or students, whatever, and it works. You can see that most of the time, people, when it's appropriate with windows in the room, I suggest it's hot here. I can see those people from high context cultures, obviously, Asians in general, generalizing. They at least look at the window and try to understand what does the teacher here means, or the trainer. Shall I open the window? They kind of hesitate. And I see those from low context culture, the Dutch, they're just basically sitting there and say, no, I don't think it's hot, your problem. and they don't get the point at all, right? So I think this, again, Seiji, it was for me too a real life case of what I call that high context, low context, which is reading between the lines, authority, trust, etc. So I think it's speaking. I love this example, and I use it a lot as an anecdote, and I think I encourage you to do that as well. It works.
Yeah.
Could I also give an example?
Who's speaking? Sorry.
This is Joyce. And
yes.
I also wanted to give a similar example, but how it works both ways. So in China, I had a wonderful lady who worked with me, who was my assistant, and at one point I just, again, like Vincent, to myself, was looking around the room, the office, and there were hundreds of books everywhere, and they were not, and I thought, oh, I just said, oh, it would be great if all the books were in alphabetical order. And the next morning, I came into the office, and my assistant had stayed up all night and had ordered and labeled every book in the office in alphabetical order and put them on the shelves. And she was exhausted. And I felt terrible because she had taken it literally as me hinting that she should stay up all night and do this. But then I got used to it. Then when I moved back to the UK, and whenever I mentioned something, nobody did anything. I was saying, what's wrong? Why is nobody jumping around doing what I'm hinting that they want to do? So you have to adjust both ways.
Yes.
Can I also?
So I'd like to invite anybody listening in to ask questions of whoever has just spoken. Right? It's not just me, Polly, and Seiji who can ask for elaborations from somebody who spoke. Anybody, please feel free. Before that, I just want to point out that Pritima has shared very nicely to Metal's question that Marshall Rosenberg called it nonviolent communication because he was influenced by Gandhi. She's given a link to a YouTube talk by Rosenberg where Rosenberg said he believed we use subtle violence in our communication, and it's not just limited to physical, but also verbal and non-verbal violence. So thank you very much, Pritima. Thanks for sharing. Anybody want to ask Joyce or Vincent a question?
May I just add the other side of getting the high context communication? I mentioned that before in the SIETAR webinar, but one time working in Japan, one time my boss came to me and said, Seiji, client is coming this afternoon, and he just left. And obviously, without so much context, I didn't know what needs to be done. So I had to guess that, do I need to present something, or do I need to prepare tea, or do I need to whatever? So I went through all my mind. And then in the afternoon, client came and CEO went in, and also the sales manager went in. I was never called in. What he meant by the end, and he told me off that not being able to understand what he meant was that, Seiji, client is coming this afternoon, and your desk is so messy, so clean up. And just because that kind of high context, it can backfire as some people. It can backfire as some people commented on the chat that this sort of high context communication, if you don't get it right, it's just very confusing. And there are a lot of different cues. Like apparently, everyone else around me understood what he meant, although they could have told me, but. When he was telling me that the Seiji client is coming this afternoon, he was actually looking at my desk. So, but I didn't pick up on that because of the lack of experience working in Japan, or I was just paying attention to something else. So just to give in the example of the high context not being done right on the other side.
So I think there's a famous example of an airplane crash where they checked the black box and the recording, and the co-pilot, who was from a high context culture, knew something was wrong, but didn't know how to tell the pilot that he was making a mistake, and he was being indirect for too long, and it cost them all their lives, right? So I think we need to sort of know when to be indirect and when we really need to be direct. Or even if you're in a direct culture, when it's sometimes better to be indirect, right? It's a continuum.
Yeah.
I see that we're close to running out of time. I'd like to suggest the panelists leave us with one main suggestion or question that they think would be beneficial as a way to wrap up. And then I understand if some people have to go, but then we do have a wrap up with Marie-Therese sharing her observations and what will happen next. But can I ask the panelists to very quickly just sort of say one line, one suggestion or one question that they think would be useful? Polly or Seiji, would you like to start?
Yeah, my invitation is like, it's a long life journey and it's a beautiful journey. Do your inner research all the time and be curious. It's fun.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Polly. Seiji?
I'm just going to quote someone. I guess it's being used a lot in the leadership courses in Japan. It's by Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby. He said, to be kind is more important to be right. Many times, what people need is not brilliant mind that speaks, but a special heart that listens.
Thank you. And from me, I have a suggestion for a script to use when you're in a cross-cultural situation, whether it's ethnic culture or professional culture or government talking to business. The phrase I suggest using is to start off by saying, in my world, this is how we do it. How is it done in your world, right? And so you open up for the other person to sort of share their approach. And then it doesn't become about whose way prevails, but can we understand each other first and then figure out how we proceed. So in my world, this is how we do it. How is it in your world? And world could mean anything. So with that, thank you everybody. You've been so participative. It's so great. I'm grateful for your attention, as I'm sure Polly is, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from all of you. So, Marie-Therese, would you do us the honor of kindly wrapping up and telling us what's next?
Okay, in 2 minutes, right? Because everybody needs to go now. Thank you very much, Polly and Srivan and Seiji. I think you have really inspired a lot of thinking and a lot of reflection that we all have. You know, it's always, what am I taking away from this, right? What is the, I'm not going to summarize all the things you have said and all the things you have taught us in a certain sense, but it is, I would like to ask each of us actually, what am I taking away from this? And if I will give my takeaway from this, it would be what you said, Srivan, about this, the practice of this nonviolent or indirect communication, etc. And for me, I know this is the most difficult thing to do, is before you react, pause. Because this is the most difficult and the most important thing to do. Not to jump in, not to be too fast. You know, it's this kind of mindfulness in a certain way of stop yourself, control yourself in a certain sense. And this is something I really appreciate in Asia, actually, that people seem to be able to do that much more than in the Western world, where people jump in. And in Asia, people think before they seem to think. It's actually they pause and they control themselves, and they don't just jump in like that. And that's something that I've had a hard time learning. And I'm still struggling with it sometimes. You know, I'm the kind of person who would jump in and you know, show my enthusiasm for the things, or my anger, or whatever it is, whatever feeling. And I've been learning and having a hard time pausing. And then, of course, all the rest, the empathizing and showing the compassion and put yourself in other people's shoes is easier if you can control that first impulsion that you have. So again, thank you. I mean, we've had, I think, one of the most inspiring meetings that I've had lately, with a lot of wonderful reflection and learnings and good examples, good practice as well. So thank you again. Thank you everybody for coming to this meeting. We will have more meetings. The next one will be about leadership. And then after that, teamwork. All this in Asia, leadership in Asia, and then teamwork in Asia. So be ready. Keep an eye open for our announcements here on this website, in this group. And there's a lot more to come. Thank you, everybody. Keep well, keep safe, keep healthy, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.